Hello, thanks for joining me. The purpose of this video and subsequent videos is to give you an overview of Orature 3.0, to focus on some of the major features that have changed from the previous iteration of Orature, as well as to go through some recommended features, some best practices, and an opportunity to maybe ask some questions that you have, as well as have you propose future videos for us or questions we may not cover here. So the first question I want to answer is, how do I get a hold of Orature? Well, you may be brand new to Orature, and if so, there are a couple different ways to discover that. If you go to BibleInEveryLanguage.org, in addition to all the other features this site has, it also has a Tools section. If you click on the Tools section, one of the first items here on the Tools page is Orature, BTT Orature, and if you click on that, it brings you to this page here, where you can download the version of Orature appropriate for your machine. You can also go directly to our BibleTranslationTools.org site, where we focus specifically on a number of tools and converters that will be a help to you in Bible translation in general. And then we have a section that specifically, once again, directs you to Orature, talks about an overview, and provides an area to go to the help desk and documentation for further help. If you already have Orature installed, then you can check for an upgrade. So for example, here I have Orature 1.9, the previous version that was advertised on that page. And if I simply go to the Info button at the bottom, then that will bring up this section here that shows me my current version, and right below that is a check for updates. When I click on that, if you're connected to the internet, it'll go out and check our site and present you an opportunity to download the latest version, in which case you can install right on top of Orature 1.9 and get you the latest version. So whether you've upgraded or installed Orature 3 for the first time, you're going to come into the screen looking somewhat similar like this on first load up. Unless, of course, you are installing over a version of Orature that already has existing projects, in which case you'll see them here. In this case here, of course, we've got a blank screen, and the screen is literally telling us create a project to get started, click the plus button, which is the blue button here. Before we do that, just a couple quick things to note. At any time, I could click the Home button up here, and it will bring me back to this screen. So if I wanted to switch a particular project that I was working on, that would be helpful to know. If I need to, we can go through Settings. The button and the features are located here. We'll look at that later in time. And then lastly, the Info button, which you got a sneak peek of previously, contains information about the build and some other various features that you can are important to the use of Orature. The Import button, for those who are used to Orature 1.0, has moved to this page specifically. Previously, you could import items from any page within Orature, but that has been moved to this page here to help streamline the use. All right, let's go ahead and click this plus button and look at the different types of creation projects that we can work on in Orature. This is a big difference from previous version, and that is because Orature 3 recognizes that there are many different types of projects that you might want to create. One, which would be an oral translation, specifically focusing on being able to listen to a gateway language, a language of wider communication, and then following the math steps, creating a translation into a different language, a mother tongue, a heart language. Narration, this middle step here, is, as you might expect, the ability to take a written text and make an audio recording of that same language. This is very useful for projects that may have already done some of the translation work and want to make it more easily available in an audio form, or if you are trying to create audio narration for use later as translation, and we'll cover that as a different time as well. And lastly, dialect, which often is using a written existing gateway language, but of course has its own pronunciation, its own way of speaking, whether that be an accent or substitution of certain words or phrases. So therefore it starts out in the gateway language, but will end in a slightly different, in that language code that's appropriate for that dialect. So kind of blending both steps of oral narration and oral translation. First up, we'll look at narration. Whether you've used Orature 1.0 or this is your first time using it, narration was an ability that you had in the previous version, but has changed significantly. One of the first things that you might notice is that the previous version of Orature only offered English as a default language. Any other language that you wanted to use, you would have to install into Orature and teach it that language. Here, as you notice, we have a considerable number that you can start with as a default. There's just shy of 30 different gateway languages. If your language is not included here, you can still add other languages, and that might be very helpful, especially for mother tongues that are trying to narrate. So for example, if they finish their project as a text project in perhaps another product like Writer, that can actually be brought into Orature, and you can begin your narration project even though it is not a gateway language. In our example here today, we're going to start with English. And again, because it is a narration, we know that our source and our output are the same. I only need to click on the language once, and it will begin us through the process of creating a Bible project for narration in English. What you see here are all the books of the English Bible, as in canonical order here, going from the Old Testament to the New Testament. We can see that none of them currently have any progress here. These bars are all blank. This is not just a list to represent where to find all of these books, but it also can be sorted. So for example, you could sort the book in alphabetical order, reverse alphabetical order, click again to get to canonical order. I could also sort by code, the shortened code. This can sometimes be helpful if you have a language in another script here. The code will still be readable in English as it uses the Roman characters, even if it is a non-Roman script. Also the anthology, you can sort by Old Testament and New Testament. And lastly, as we move along and are creating projects, if we haven't completed a project and want to pick up one that was in progress, this is a short way to be able to sort them by their progress. But for today, I think it'll be easier just to kind of look at it in canonical order, as we're mostly all used to that. I'm going to start our example here in Esther. Now I could scroll down to the list until I find Esther, or I could utilize this search field here. And I can either use the anglicized name or the way it is spelled. Maybe if I had this in Spanish or Portuguese, another language, I could type in the natural name, or I could even do the code name. So there's many different ways to be able to filter this very quickly. So I'm just going to start here, Esther. And so that reduced the list down, so I was able to find it very quickly. Now, Esther starts out, we can see the screen here. I'm actually in chapter 1, so I'm going to want to go to a different chapter. And that leads me to our first note that I could just simply walk my way through increment by clicking this forward button to get to chapter 2 and then chapter 3 and subsequent. But if I clicked on the chapter button itself, it'll bring me kind of the matrix of all the chapters in that particular book. So I'm going to go ahead and go to chapter 10. The second thing is you can, for those who, if this is your first time working with Orature, is that bar that is all the way over here is already reacting to my voice. It's letting me know right away how how loud my voice is, that Orature can be able to hear me. Now, it's not actively recording me, it is listening. And this is really just to kind of help you gauge your microphone level. So if you want to test your microphone before you start recording, is it loud enough? What is the approximate size that I can expect the waveform will be, the amplitude? And this will give you an idea. We'll probably get more into that later, but generally speaking, if it's in the green, you're good to go. Next up, we have this red line. You'll see that pretty much this red line, especially when we're playing back audio, that's where, as a waveform crosses the red line, that's what we're going to be listening to audibly. Down below, we'll see the text of this chapter that we're about to read. And something different that is, since the previous version of Orature, is we actually make specific areas that you can record the book name as well as the chapter name. So we're already in chapter 10. We already have recorded previously the book of Esther, presumably. So we're going to, we only need to record chapter 10 there, because obviously audio works differently than text. It's very easy for us in text to kind of sort through, where am I in this book of the Bible or in this particular chapter, but when doing audio it can be a little bit more challenging. So it's nice to have those audio cues of the book name and the chapter name to help orient. Next up, we see that each of these segments are broken up by verse, and that each segment has a record button. Now, when I go ahead and actually hit this record button, we're going to see it split into two. One is going to be called a pause button, and the other is going to be next. The pause button, as you might anticipate, if I'm recording and I want to stop before I continue on, I can certainly hit the pause and it'll do just that. If I hit the next button, you'll see that it's going to add a marker on the screen. And that may be just to help divide the information of what is the chapter title between verse 1 and verse 2 and verse 3. So essentially, for most of the time, it's going to be inserting a verse marker as I move along. And the purpose of this, of course, is to allow me to read this more naturally. What you'll be seeing going on here is that the lines that it wants me to read will be highlighted in blue, and it'll be to the middle of this page. And as I click the next line will move up into that spot. So essentially, I'm just having to keep my eyes in one focused area of the screen. I can keep my mouse also in the similar area and continue reading. This hopefully will make it for a much more natural recording, as opposed to the previous version where we had to stop recording at each verse and then begin recording deliberately, causing a lot of gaps, introducing some dead space in the recording. So let's go ahead and try that. Chapter 10. Then King Xerxes imposed a tax on the land and on the coastlands along the sea. All of the achievements of his power and might, together with the full account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king had raised him, they are written in the book of events of the reigns of the kings of Media and Persia. Mordecai, the Jew, was second in rank to King Xerxes. He was great among the Jews, and shown favor by his many Jewish brothers, for he sought the welfare of his people, and spoke for the peace of all his people. You might notice that as I got to the last verse there, instead of saying next and perhaps moving me on to the next chapter, that it actually said save, because I've now essentially completed the chapter. So for example, if I looked up here in the list of chapters, it now notes that chapter 10 has been complete, meaning that I have content for each of those chunks that we went along. Also, the buttons beside in the individual verses has changed to a re-record. So let's go over the buttons now. So if I've made a recording, probably one of the first things I want to do is listen back to it. Maybe check my words against the text on the page. Did I do a good job? And one of the ways that I can do that is hit the play all button, which would allow me to start from the beginning and play it back.
Then King Xerxes imposed a tax on the land and on the coastlands along the sea. All of the achievements of his power and might, together with the full account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king had raised him, they are written in the book of events.
Now I'm going to pause there for a moment, because that's one of the features. The button changed from a play all to a pause. And I saw an opportunity that I could do just a little bit of refinement. I can certainly use my mouse button clicking and holding, and I could move the screen like this, or if you have a touch screen, I'm touching the screen, I can do the same thing. But I'm going to use these next and previous buttons here. What this will do is this will jump me back to the beginning of the verse, the previous verse. So it's going to jump back here to where the border of verse 2 and verse 3 are. And you'll see that there's a little marker here. I can also move it. I happen to notice that the marker here is pretty close to where I was still talking. That's a little bit, I'm uncomfortable with that. And so you can simply just grab that marker and move it. I can also say, oh, you know what, I didn't finish listening to all that verse, maybe I want to resume. And it will resume from where I have
the
that
achievements
marker.
of his power and might.
Or I could simply skip ahead to the next verse, and it jumps ahead to that where that location is, and I could play it from there. Alternately, I can also play an individual verse. So I can, for example, here in verse 1, I can simply click the play
Then
button
King
by the
Xerxes
verse.
imposed a tax in the land and on the coastlands along the sea.
And it will start and finish just on that verse. Now, let's pretend for a moment that I want to make a different recording of that. Perhaps I listened back and I made a mistake. I want to re-record that. What it will do is it will replace the audio for that verse right in place. Then King Xerxes imposed a tax on the land and on the coastlands along the sea. Now, I deliberately set it a little bit softer because that is one of the ramifications that can happen if you do recordings at a different time and not in context when you do it all at once. You might end up getting a result that doesn't necessarily fit there. In this particular case, perhaps I didn't like what I did there. We also have a very powerful button up at top. The entire time that I've been making these little decisions on the screen, it has been populating these actions and recording them, meaning that it knows what I did. And so I have up here a undo and redo. So for example, I played this back. Let's go ahead.
Then King Xerxes imposed a tax on...
That's way too small. I did it better the first time. Let's go ahead and bring that back. So I'm going to click on this undo, and voila. My work is back in place. Fantastic. I can also return it the way it was. With the redo, it brings it back and forward. So it basically steps through that possibility. Up here next to this button provides me some more options. We'll talk more about opening the chapter or chunks or other audio in some of the helper algorithms in a later part. And we'll get into what edit verse markers does in a different part of the application. That'll make more sense. But for example, this button may be very helpful and you can restart the chapter. Perhaps maybe a different voice is better. Perhaps somebody did the work there and we've chosen somebody else that we want to do that, or I wasn't happy with my microphone and wanted to re-record it to make it fit the quality that I have for the rest of the chapter, and maybe I want to re-record that. And lastly, import. We'll get into this function later on, but generally speaking, what this will allow me to do is if I have audio from another source, if I already have pre-existing WAV files or MP3s, and I just want to essentially add it into Orature because Orature handles the management of my audio so much better, we can do that, and we'll show you that example. All right, next up, I'm going to click back to my home button and we'll talk about translation. I've returned back to the home screen, and just before I go to the translation project, I wanted to note that, of course, here's our book in place, and we can already see, having done one of the 10 chapters, we can see some progress being made, again, letting me know of the state of that. So returning to this screen, we're now going to start with an oral translation project. So once again, the purpose of this is going to be to listen to audio and then begin our blind translation or blind drafting towards a translation of that. For today's example, again, we're going from one language into a different language. We're going to start with English because I'm going to be reading English, and then we can choose from one of our other languages that are known. Now this list is considerably larger. The previous list was only about just under 30 lists, but of course this list is clearly much bigger. So it's going to be very helpful if you know, again, either the natural name, the anglicized name, or perhaps even the code. So I'm going to, and sometimes the code for the language doesn't necessarily fit intuitively with the language name. So for example, I'll do, we can see here the language name here, and bam, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but the code is PTU. So it kind of depends where you're getting your information from, but you can find that out. And of course, we can see this language is not a gateway language, so we are translating from a gateway into a mother tongue or hard language. We'll go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go to the book of Job here. And we'll go to chapter 25. Now, one of the first things that the screen is telling me, of course, is that in order to start the project, I do need audio to listen to. So the Orature doesn't install with all of the audio. That would just be way too big to download. So we encourage you to be able to do that for the projects and languages that you need. But this page will help me accomplish that. And one of the ways to do this is that the big obvious blue button here, check online, if I'm connected to the internet, it will actually bring me to where we have all of the various languages there. So I can go to English in this case. We have audio files available in a number of different formats, but we have them already ready for Orature consumption to be imported from there. And I can see the books of the Bible that we have here. Once again, if I wanted to, I could just simply search and get to Job. Depending on your internet connection or need, you could download the entire book, which of course would be all the audio, or you could simply go and grab the particular chapter that we need. So I'm going to go ahead and download just chapter 25. Now once I'm back into Orature, I can either use my, click on this, the choose the file, to go through my operating system and grab that individual file, or if you have it already available and downloaded, you can simply just grab it, drag and drop right into that space there. And we'll see that drag and drop feature later on too. Okay, so now the screen has changed dramatically. We can see here for chapter 25 of Job. What I have is, it takes the 8 steps of MAST and kind of presents them to you in this particular order. The first section is to allow you to consume and verbalize. So the MAST methodology wants us to listen to the chapter as many times as necessary to get us a good idea of what's going on, who's speaking, what are the events, who are the characters, and then be able to verbalize it. So this helps with the process of understanding of the chapter and preparing to be able to translate it. To play it back, simply click on the play source here, and once again, as the audio crosses that line, the red line, it's being played.
Answered and said, "Dominion and fear are with him. He makes order in his high places of heaven. Is there any end to the number of his armies?"
And we can see that in this case, there are verse markers that are showing me where the verses happen. But we're going to see that disappear in just a moment. So I'm going to pause and presume that we had listened to the entire chapter. Maybe you actually listened to it a couple times, because my next purpose here would be to verbalize that, me being able to tell somebody else, hey, here's what I heard in chapter 25. This is what was going on. The program, of course, doesn't know when you've accomplished that, so it has presented us with the next step of chunking when we are ready. So the user will tell the program when you're ready to progress. So let's go ahead and click on chunking now. What we'll see is that the verse markers are actually missing here. We're not going to be seeing those because they're no longer relevant, because my job here in chunking is to create Glen-sized chunks. These are chunks that you're going to make that are kind of what you can hold in your head or what thematically makes sense for you to be able to be doing blind drafting for the next step. The sizes of your chunks are going to differ probably from the rest of the people in your team or at the event. They're purposely meant for that individual. I would also like to recommend that during this time here, we've often found it very helpful to have 2 people at very minimum, maybe even 3, working together with the software during each of these stages. So that way it presents the person who's doing the translating with just the job of listening, speaking, translating, and having another person designated as the operator of the software. And maybe a third person to just kind of be that second brain to like, oh, I think you meant to do this. I think you might want to click that button. Very handy there. So we're going to go ahead and add our first chunk. And again, this is just telling the program, I'd like you to start from here. This is the first section I want you to basically play back, and then I'm going to attempt to translate. And I'm going to go ahead and play it. The buttons have moved to over here, so I'm going to go ahead and play.
Job chapter 25.
So naturally, I think that's a good breaking point for me. I'm going to add a chunk right there.
And Bildad the Shuhite answered and said.
Now I'm making rather short chunks, and that's fine. I would recommend that this is a skill that you're going to build up, especially for yourself and perhaps with the operator being able to anticipate what is a right-sized chunk. Always probably a good idea to make smaller chunks to begin with rather than large ones. You don't really want to have to discover like you made chunks too big and have to go back and redo your work, because that's not as much fun as it
Dominion
sounds.
and fear are with him. He makes order in his high places of heaven. Is there any end to the number of his armies? Upon whom does he...
So you've noticed that I've paused sometimes and added a chunk, or sometimes I've just gone ahead and I can kind of roll and just drop it in there. Whatever works. If you decided you've made a mistake, the chunk allows you to do a couple things. You could even move it, like, oh, that was too small, I want to move it to this location. Or perhaps I didn't even mean to put it there, and in which case I can actually delete that chunk. In the same way, if I made a mistake, I didn't like the action I did, I still can just go to my undo, and it brings back those steps, not only the deletion of the chunk, but even where I moved it. So very handy feature. I can undo and redo. All right, so once again, we're going to pretend for the moment that I have completed my chunking process and I'm ready to start blind drafting. So one, the consume and verbalize checked off. Since I clicked into chunking, it said, good, we're done with that stage. Let's move on to chunking. We've now just completed chunking, so we're going to tell the program we're ready for the next stage. So I'm going to click blind draft and self-edit, which will make chunking green as an accomplished step and open up a new interface for us. The purpose here, of course, is now it's going to be playing back the audio for me of the chunks that I've created. All right. The top part here is my source audio. This is the audio in that gateway language that I'm listening to.
Job chapter 25.
And what I'm going to do is want to make my translated attempt at that. Job chapter 25. All right, so I've made my recording. However, I'm looking at that, and probably my friend David would tell me, Glenn, I don't like that, how tall that spike is. That's concerning me. Could you maybe redo that? Great, yeah, sure, we can do that. I could cancel that, and it won't save that recording. If I cancel that, I can go ahead and make a new recording. Job chapter 25. Okay, yeah, he gave me the thumbs up. That's not too bad. And so therefore, I can go ahead and save that. If perhaps if this was a longer thing, and again, I felt the need to pause, maybe I was saying a list of names or trying to remember the names. Hey, could I pause? Could you tell me that name again? All right, I'm going to read that in there because names you don't usually need to translate. So the pause and resume works there. It continues to build up that section. But I'm going to save this for the moment. So my next job is actually to listen back to my audio. So I wanted to play back my chunk.
Job chapter 25.
And then play my take.
Job chapter 25.
That wasn't too bad. I kind of liked that. But then David reminded me, he's like, hey, Glenn, way back in Job chapter 1, so we actually said the book Job. We probably don't need to do that again. Maybe you could just give me chapter 25. Can you give me another take? Sure can. Let's go ahead and do that. Chapter 25. All right, so now this new take appeared here and as take 2. So this is the recent one. And it's got this little star here. The star is its way of indicating to me this is what the program assumes is the best take. The user, you can actually tell it, nah, I like this one. You can move that around. Or you can get rid of that. So when I played this back,
Chapter 25.
David told me, by the way, there was too much dead space in the beginning, didn't like that. Could you take that again? And also it was a little bit loud. Can you kind of back off on your microphone? Let's do that again. So, sure, I'll give him another recording. Chapter 25. Dave's a harsh critic. Okay. So once again, I'd play this back again until I'm satisfied. Now, general rule of thumb, you can take as many takes as you want. The program is only going to really pay attention to the one that is marked the star, with the star. And again, you can move that star around. You could say, I really like to take one that was so great, or I can return it back here to take 3, whatever you want to do. Or you can actually clean up. So I know that I don't want take 1. And I want to get rid of that, so you can just go ahead and delete that. So whatever is going to be the best practice as indicated to you by your facilitator, your team leader, my recommendation is if you don't need it, get rid of it. And if you need to retake it, that's fine. All right, I've gone ahead and recorded the rest of my chunks, and so I'm about ready to go to the next stage. So we've now gone through consuming and verbalizing, we've done the chunking, we've done the blind drafting, and now it's time to actually bring other people into the process. This is where we want to bring it to our peer groups or start using resources to check our works. The MAST methodology wants us to go through 4 different steps. So again, listen to your facilitators, your team leaders, for how to go about that. But the process in Orature is going to be fairly simple. The idea is that you are going to, once again, listen to the chunk as originally done.
Job chapter 25.
And then go ahead and play the translation that you're hearing.
Chapter 25.
Now, the job of the group is to listen back to that and confirm or have corrections made. So that larger group than just yourself, or maybe the 2 or 3 individuals that you have there, are going to provide feedback. And if they decide that's great, they can confirm that. We can see that here, that as I done that, it is now made a check mark there, and I can go on to the next check, again repeating the process in this chapter. There is text available. This is text from the Unlocked Literal Bible, but it's not required to have that open. You can simply move that to the side and focus in on the audio, as a translation project is probably going to not be very text heavy. It's going to be actually mostly absent there, so it may not be useful for most people. But that will be perhaps useful coming at a later stage. So once again, I would go ahead and play.
Then Bildad the Shuhite answered and said.
Then Bildad the Shuhite replied.
All right, so that was pretty close. That's our translation. Perhaps the group had a different recommendation of a word I should substitute, or maybe they want me to re-record it. And that's when we want that group to, and the originator of the audio and the peer group who are checking it to kind of be in that same space. Because if they do have a recommendation, I want to go ahead and record that right here. That's what this record button is going to do. It's going to replace that chunk based on the need for creating a corrected or better translation for this chunk as determined by the group and recorded by the original translator. So the idea is we'd go through each of these steps, confirming or re-recording as necessary, and we'd continue for all of those. I'm obviously skipping some steps here to get to the end. We'll see that the next couple key checks here are going to involve some different steps, but not from the Orature's point of view. It's going to be simply play the original, play the translation, hopefully a different audience or using different resources to inform the group in terms of the accuracy or the need for re-recording, continually refining as moving forward. And I'm going to jump ahead to the final review here in just a moment. Okay. So we're presuming at this stage we've gone through a number of the various checks, different groups of people, and we're ready for final review. Here we've got a couple extra things that we may want to add to that, and that would be one, as we mentioned previously, our chunks have helped us accumulate all of this audio, which is great. But what we have are verse markers that are missing. And so as part of the final review, we want that individual to place the markers back in to let us know where that difference is. So that's where that text actually can be handy to come back in and give us an idea according to the ULB, my gateway text that I was translating this from. Or I can play some of the source audio. But this is going to be more helpful for us to do that. So I'm going to go ahead here and go to the beginning, because our first verse was going to start potentially before I start talking. But we happen to know, let's see, I'm going to add my first, I'm going to listen back and wait till I hear my content.
Job chapter 25. Then Bildad.
Okay, let's play.
Chapter 25.
Okay, so my first verse is going to start here, and then I can continue on.
Then Bildad the Shuhite replied, Dominion and awe belong.
All right, so I heard dominion and awe.
Dominion and awe.
That's where the next verse goes in, number 2. And I would repeat this process.
Dominion and awe belong to God. He establishes order in the heights of heaven. Can his forces be?
And so on and so forth, until we've completed adding the verse markers for all of the chapter there. So I'm going to fast forward to when I've done that. All right, I've gone ahead and added the verse markers back in. I could proceed to go to the next chapter and begin the same process again if I have the source audio ready to go and start the 8 steps and work on that. Given the fact that it's a final review, we may also decide, hey, there might be some other things that I want to do from an editing point of view. Maybe there's some features like I want to take out some spaces, make little cuts, whatever I want to do to make the audio better. And to do that, we would send it to our program here, Ocen Audio. And I could do that here. We'll have a different section kind of walking you through all the some of the recommended features that a third-party editing program can do to enhance your content. All right, I've returned back to the home screen for just a moment, and once again I'm returning to this screen here. Just for fun, I'm going to go ahead and click on the progress button here, and it brings Job up to the top. We'll notice a couple things, one of which is that not only do I see a little sliver of progress in Job, because I've only completed that one chapter, but there's also an indicator over here now of a symbol that indicates that this chapter actually has source audio. So even before you begin a translation project, it probably is a good idea to go get the audio that you want, import it, and if it shows up with audio here, that's an early indicator that you won't have to try to find it when you dive into the project. So at the end of this, there are some ellipses, this little 3-dot options. If I click on that, I can see I can do a couple things with this. One of which is to open the project as we've previously done. Another would be to make a backup of the project, and also to export components of the project or to delete the book. Now, of course, deleting the book is in red. This is not something that you will do with often and not without careful consideration. A backup, as you might imagine, in this case would make a complete copy of the project and place it wherever the user desires, whether that be a thumb drive or somewhere else on the drive. Not only will it take any of the completed chapters, but any of the chunks, any of the extra takes that you included, all of those will be saved off as WAV files. So this is a big big honkin' project. And the purpose of making a backup is not only just for safety, but for example, if I'd like to make an identical project on a different machine, if I want to pick up the work from here and give it to somebody else to carry it on from where I am, that's a great way of doing it. Then they get all of the resources that you have, including my audio, all of my source text that I use. They don't have to import that. That comes over with that. Next, we'll kind of look at the feature of export. Once I hit export, it brings me to a screen here. The first of which is backup. We've kind of talked about this option. This gives me everything that is contained within that project so far, all the individual takes or chunks, source audio, and source text if necessary, if I've loaded that in. Next up we have, and last, it would show here the estimated file size. So we've only done one small chapter in there, so it's merely 8 megs. But this can get quite large. So if I was working on Genesis, which has approximately 50 books of there, that size might be closer to a gig or over. So because of that, we also want to give you the ability to maybe select discriminately particular books. So in this case, I've only got one chapter that is relevant. But if you were to pretend that I had all 42 chapters of Job, perhaps I only wanted to export out my newest work. I didn't want to continue sending all 30 books, which would made a large file, probably too big to email, and would be a burden for others to import each and every time. I could simply send them the latest things that I worked on, and that would allow me to just select either everything or to select a particular book, and then I can export that. Once again, once that would do is it would allow me to save that out to a particular drive or somewhere on my machine. Now if we look at the narration project once again, and I see Esther, it doesn't have any audio in it, but we know we've recorded audio, right? This is a symbol, just the symbol in Job is indicating that I have source audio that I can listen to begin to translate. But I would like to perhaps share my work out of Esther. If I click on the 3 ellipses here, once again, I'm provided with the opportunity to export. Now I can take the English version of Esther that I've create it as source audio, and that will output it as essentially MP3s, a much smaller version in a particular Orature file size. You'll notice the estimated file size on here is now less than a meg, 0.4 megabytes. And that can be imported on somebody else's machine so they can use my English narration of Esther to begin translation into perhaps a different language. Speaking of which, you can also create an MP3 specifically for listening. So the source audio creates a file that ends in a .orature. So it basically means this is meant to be imported into Orature. The listen file will create a file that is an MP3, ends in MP3. So able to play on phones, natively on pretty much most every devices, even some external devices designed specifically to share Bible audio. And then lastly, we've got publish, which is basically grabbing all of the finalized audio to be able to share upstream, perhaps hopefully with us, so that we can kind of put it up on our site and make it available for others to use as a resource or to listen to, using for edification or for translation. Back here on the home page, there's another set of ellipses next up to the project name there. So the project here is I'm an English narration project, and there's another kind of ellipse going on here, vertical one. That indicates I have more options. If I click on that, I'll see 2 of them here. One of them indicates that I can delete a project. However, this is not yet an option. This is a delete is not red. It's kind of grayed out, if you will, and that is because we don't let you necessarily delete an entire project if there is existing content. So in this case, I would have to be able to delete the book of Esther. Okay, it has been deleted. And now, if I went and wanted to delete the project, it would let me do so. There's another one up top of that, which is modify contributors. Who are contributors? Contributors are anyone that works on this project. So in your group, it's not only the person that's speaking, it could be the operator at the keyboard, the person that's helping with the checker, facilitator, anyone that we wish to extend credit. You can use their real name here, or if you want to use a pseudonym where a real name wouldn't be appropriate, you want to be able to do that. That helps not only to give proper attribution, but also to ensure that we are complying with our rules of copyright. So all of the source code, all of the content that we contribute through Orature is open source. It is freely distributed, freely given, free to use, and you're able to do so as well. But it will retain the names and of the contributors and other information. Let's look a little bit at our settings button now. We'll notice here that in settings I can do a number of things. The first of which is I can actually change the language. Now this is not necessarily the language that I am translating. This is the language that is displayed to on the screen. So for example, we're going to go ahead and click on this and you'll see I have a number of different languages that I can choose from. I'm going to go ahead and some of them in Roman script, some are not. Let's go ahead and choose Vietnamese. And what this screen is telling us is in order to take all the displayed text and put it in Vietnamese, I need to close Orature and open it back up again. So if I didn't mean to do that, I can simply click on the X and that goes away. But for this demo, of course, I do want to close Orature. And once it's restarted, now we can see that some of the text that was displayed on the screen is quite a bit different. So if I click on this screen here, the instructions and descriptions here are all in Vietnamese. I'm going to go ahead and return that to English. Next up, let's look at audio device settings. The purpose of this is if most of the time you may not have to worry about this if you're working on a laptop with just a set of headphones or an attached microphone or whatnot. That may be fine. Your machine might not have any problems. But if you're determining that it's not behaving the way that you want, you've got multiple devices attached and it's not using the correct one, you can simply go here and specify. You can see what the operating system thinks it has for different options for audio output and input, and choose the one that is appropriate. Language settings. Very occasionally and slowly over time, our list of known languages or languages that are available can grow bigger. It doesn't happen often, but if, for example, you happen to know of a language that is missing in Orature, but perhaps it's available, your facilitator says, no, we got the assets, it's up on Bible in every language, we have it elsewhere, but it's not present in Orature. You can check for updates, and it will, if present, provide you a link to a file you can download and import into Orature, and then Orature will now be able to identify present the option for those other languages that it knows. In a similar way that we saw in the first video of how we checked for an update for Orature. The next section here highlights the fact that I have a helper program available, and that helper program is Ocen Audio. Back on our website, if you scroll down, there is a mention here of using third-party edit and record plugins. This allows you to use some different software to help with the finalization project, whether it be editing or using different features and functions, filters on your audio. We like to recommend Ocen Audio. We don't own it. It's open source. It's free to use, but it pairs very well with Orature. So if you do follow that link, install the version that is correct for your machine, and then open Orature. Orature will actually automatically detect it if you've installed it in any of the default areas. If you installed it somewhere different or using a different audio application, then you can actually use the helper application here, filling in the name that you wish to call it, where it's located on your machine. You can browse to it and then also specify what role you want it to play, whether you'd like it to be the default recorder or the default editor. And as you can see here, I have Orature as my default recorder. It's in line with the microphone here. And I have Ocen Audio as my default editor. And we'll take a look at what that looks like later. Down below are shortcuts. So for some people, it's very natural to use a mouse. Other people tend to like to use shortcuts because it is very quick to use, especially if they're repetitive actions and you don't feel like grabbing the mouse and moving it over those many inches. This is something that can be very helpful to speed up some of your process. We started out our first video looking at how to get Orature, either from installing it from scratch or checking for updates, and the link that it provides when you check for that. But underneath that, we have view logs. So, and also an area to put bug reports or suggestions. In the event that Orature should crash, it'll come up with a screen that will indicate to you there's been an error, maybe give some information about that, and provide you an option to opt in, meaning click this button and I will send that report back to our team as something that happened, which is very helpful for us. It gives us the state of the machine and also something we can look for and make for an improvement. If that should happen, but you don't have internet access, or it's not convenient to do so, maybe it's not in a location that you can do so, you have to wait till you get to a hotel or different area, you can do that after the fact. And simply by clicking in here, once you give us a description there, it will highlight this button or make this button active, where it would allow you to send that description, and it will send the logs to us. So that gives us context of what was the thing you were trying to do and send those logs to us. You don't necessarily have to send an error report. You also use this field even here if it's just a good idea. Like, hey guys, just thought I would send you this feature that would really help my team. You can do that directly there. Next up, we'll look at Ocen Audio and some basic features for how to use that. But I do want to recommend that if there's any information that has not been covered in this series that you'd like to see, please reach out to us. We enjoy making the videos. We enjoy people giving us great new ideas. So we're also looking for that, new features that might help Orature be even more useful to you. All right, we're back here to kind of explore a little bit about Ocen Audio and some features that we have found are commonly used and some different navigation tools. There are many ways in which you can intersect with Ocen Audio. As we saw in settings, you can also make Ocen Audio your default recorder, which may be a great option. And when I say Ocen Audio, really what I'm referring to is whatever program that you use as your third-party helper, your external audio software. But in today's case, I want to kind of focus on narration for just a moment, because you can actually go into Ocen Audio from translation, as we saw in the final step of checking for a chapter there. But we can go to it from a couple points here. One of which is we can actually do it from any individual verse. I could actually send it to open up that particular verse. So in an earlier example, when I had a verse that was too soft in comparison to the rest of the chapter, and maybe I didn't have opportunity of the original person who was recording it to come back and re-record it. Maybe I wanted to see what I could do afterwards to make it better, make it fit in a little bit better. That's where an external audio tool could be really helpful. So you can do it for an individual section, or you can do it for the whole particular chapter. So we're looking at obviously a very short chapter here, Psalm 117, and I'm going to open up into Ocen Audio. The previous screen you saw underneath shows me all of the text for Psalm 117. That can be particularly helpful if you're working in an environment where you have more than one screen. So Orature can maintain being open here, and you can open up Ocen Audio on a separate screen. But if you're just dealing with one screen, really the most important part is to have Ocen Audio, which is why it opened up on top of Orature. But we'll see that process reverse when we've finished. So I'm looking here. We can see that Orature has sent it a very specific wave file. It has a name up in the top. It's reflected here as well in the particular waveform that I'm seeing here. English, it's the ULB. It is Psalms. It happens to be chapter 117 or Psalm 117, and it is the full, not a verse, but the full chapter. This upper area here that I'm looking at, that represents the waveform in its entirety for the entire chapter. I'm really looking at a segment of that here, and I'll really show that off here as I kind of zoom in. And the way I'm zooming is I'm taking my mouse wheel and I'm kind of zooming in, or I could kind of use these plus and minuses up here on this top bar. So of course, depending on which app you're using here, they'll have different ways of maneuvering the same thing, but the function is going to be the same. Now you can see that even though this overall waveform is represented on top, only a particular section here is highlighted, the section that I'm seeing down below. This can be really handy when I want to zoom in to something specific, if I heard a particular thing. So for example, in this verse here, I can kind of see a little bit of a waveform, a little blip there that is not probably audio. So if I click, either if I click and hold, I can listen to a particular section and play that back. And you can see it just played that particular section. I didn't hear any particular words or anything important in there. I can also click my white line. You can see I've got a white line there, and it will start playing from
For his
that
covenant
particular point.
faithfulness is great toward.
So in this case, I want to make a slight little edit. So I'm going to click and drag this section here that I think is not conducive to listening, and I can cut it. I can also simply delete it with the delete key on my keyboard, or I can go ahead and cut it here.
And the trustworthiness of Yahweh endures.
Once again, if I thought that I didn't like that, Ocen Audio also has an undo redo feature, so I could bring that back again, or I can return that last action that I did there. Next to that, we have this marker here, which by now you'll probably recognize is a verse marker. We do not want to delete those if we can. If you accidentally delete it, please undo it. That's going to just cause you more work on the other end. That is an important marker, whether it's a verse marker or a chunk marker, so we want to kind of avoid that. If I want to go to the beginning file, I can actually click on this area up here. In Ocen Audio, I just kind of click and hold, and it kind of jumps to that particular area. I can see another area here where I might actually want to move my verse marker. I can do it within Ocen Audio. I can move it there. Now I'm going to move it there just so you can see as a reference point this little tick there, so we can see that that in fact carries through as an edit. And I'll just make a little edit right here. Cut that there. Oh, David told me I clicked out a verse marker. That was bad. Let's bring that back. That was pretty close there. Glad I had that feature. Let's go ahead and click that. Good. Now, before I close this and return back to Orature, let me just talk about something else that you can do. Now, what we're looking at here in this waveform is a couple of different things. One of which is the height of these things is the amplitude. And certain sections in my voice, that listen even to me right now, there's parts of consonants and syllables that are louder than other things. That's how we parse our language. However, if I had a section that I thought perhaps wanted to be quieter or even louder, I can affect that. So let's say, for example, I wanted to take this section here and actually increase its amplitude if it was too small. Then I could go over to this section here of effects. Amplitude, there we go. So I'm trying to affect the amplitude, so I go to the amplitude choice, and I go down to normalize. This is something that you can do and redo a number of times here, and we suggest doing that, experimenting here until you get the right result before you send it back to Orature. So for example, if I normalize that here, perhaps I thought, oh, that 100% was a little bit too much. It's actually bigger than its neighbor. Maybe I want to undo that. So this time I'll go through and maybe make it a little bit less than. So let's go to 90%. I could choose the actual number there, or I could kind of rough guess and use my slider here. Let's see how we do here. Great. That's approximate. So I did it for a particular section. You can also select everything either through the menu. And in my case, I'm going to hit Control A. This will select the entire waveform, and I can make a modification there. So in this case, let's say I wanted to make it smaller. I would go to the amplitude, and this time I'm actually going to go to gain and reduce the gain a little bit. And it's going to make it just that little bit smaller. So we've looked at an example of how to adjust some of the normalization and how to make some very quick edits there. If you want the advanced class, we'll provide one there from David Essick talking to you about some common problems and how you might be able to avoid them, both in real time in preparation for the audio, but also if you are going to use things like looking for thresholds and noise gates and things like that, that can be handy, especially if you're going to use this tool to record to begin with. But for now, I think these are some of the most common things that we like to do when we've finished audio and want to make it even that much better before we finalize and publish. I'm going to go back here and return. Now, I don't have to go to the save. I can click it and it'll prompt me to save. So once I hit save, it'll send the file back to Orature. You'll remember this screen that we left from, and it will return me where it came from. And we can see a little reference mark. There's our marker, and there's that little blip that we wanted to do. And once again, I made an edit. My recommendation, of course, is anytime you make an edit, go ahead and play back your
Praise
work.
Yahweh,
You want to make
all
sure
you nations.
that it is of good quality.